All right, hi everyone. As has now been said many times, I'm Steacy McElwem, and I'm a data scientist at Paradox. Apologies for my voice. I had a little too much fun last night. I actually have not tried this, so... Oh, it works. Fabulous. So before I start the presentation, I'm actually going to ask you guys to do this fun activity. So go to this link, which is http://data-nights. And fill out the form. And then later on in the presentation, I'm going to see how your guesses stack up against the data. So I will give you guys just a second to do that now. So this is me. I'll be talking today about analytics at Paradox. And I am from Canada, as you can see. I came here to Sweden about 2 years ago. I heard the fish was good, and so I went. I've been a fan of Paradox for quite a long time. So it's really been a dream job for me, starting here. And I felt when I moved to Sweden that I had to come here and do what I do best, which is, of course, forcing people to look at numbers. I'm a data scientist, which is a bit like being a detective, or I like to think so, for some of my favorite games. EU4, CK2, and Hoi4. So it's pretty cool. Today I'm going to talk about how we knights of the data table in Paradox Products Insights turn game data into interesting information. If you want to know more about me, you can find my character in the Scottish court in CK2, 1066. You can find out all my fabulous traits there. Don't look at the drunkard one. But that's enough about me, I think. It's data time. So, what exactly do we do with game analytics at Paradox? How do millions of rows of data that we get every day turn into something that our dev teams can actually use? Well, we always start with a question. Questions can be things like, is this feature fun? Is the tech tree balanced? And what is your favorite country to play? Or it could be just about anything you want. The only really important thing is to know the purpose. So when we do analysis at Paradox, we aim to answer any question that can help with an actual business or development decision. At Paradox, we like to keep adding to our games, sometimes for as long as 6 years or more. So deciding how to best utilize a limited set of resources on basically an infinite number of optional upgrades is super key to our business model. And that's where the data comes in. So one question that we received from Dan Lind, who is the game director of Hoi4, who will be here represented by General MacArthur, was how do people play Hoi4 multiplayer? The purpose of this question was to ensure that when we update and add features to multiplayer, that we're putting work towards things that people actually want and need for an improved multiplayer experience. Since 10 to 15% of our Hoi4 users every day are using multiplayer, this is a pretty important question for future development. And getting it wrong could mean that we spend time on something people don't really use. And getting it right, of course, means that everyone is happy. So the stakes are high. So how do people play Hoi4 multiplayer? Well, it's a pretty broad question, and it's hard to answer just like that. So we broke it down into the following 2 questions to make it a little easier. How large are the multiplayer games in terms of players? And are people competing against each other, or are they working together in the games? It's not always super clear how to use data to answer a question, as is the case especially with our second question here. That's when it's time to get creative with your data. Using your combined knowledge of the game and thinking outside the box can help you find good indicators of the thing that you really want an answer to. The first part of the question, how large are the multiplayer games in terms of players, is fairly easy to measure. For this, we wanted to look at what the distribution of the number of players across multiplayer games was. However, if you've played Hoi4 multiplayer, you'll know we ran into a problem, which is that hot join means that players' numbers can change across the games. So we solved that by replacing this with minutes played instead. Since we are looking for popularity in terms of how much people are playing, time was still a good measure of that. The second question, are people competing against each other or working together in the games, was a little bit more challenging to answer. when you don't have built-in team structures in a multiplayer game, it can be hard to tell whether people are actually working together or not. We decided to look at two things to measure this. One was factions. If you haven't played Hoi 4 multiplayer, you can join together in a faction within the game. So basically, we looked at our players playing in factions together. The second question was, do players declare war against each other? If you are playing Hoi 4 and you want to actually compete against each other, you are probably going to go to war at some point. This was a good thing in combination with factions because you could actually be in different factions and still working together through alliances or other things. So we looked at this in combination. So once we know what we want to learn, we go and create something called a hook in the game code, which will send the data to us. For this question, the data fired when a multiplayer game started and ended and every 10 minutes in between, so we got a real picture of the game. The data itself included the number of players in the game, the number of factions with players in them, the number of players with no faction, and whether 2 or more players were at war with each other. Oh, there we go. We use the data from this hook to create 2 aspects of multiplayer styles. The first is grouping, which was based on being in a faction and shows how you come together to play the game. The second was the competition level, which was based on whether or not you had a war with another player. The 3 grouping styles were free-for-all, which is all players either have no faction or are in separate factions. Team, all players were grouped together in a faction. And mixed, some players were playing alone and some players were playing together in a faction. The competition types were competitive. A war did begin between 2 or more players at some point in the game. Non-competitive, no war began between 2 players, however, we weren't sure that they were cooperating either. Or cooperative, all players were grouped together in the same faction and were clearly working together in the game. So, how large are the multiplayer games in terms of players? Well, we saw that people group themselves mainly in games of 2 players, and in general stuck to smaller games. Using this in the future, we'd recommend focusing on adding features to make playing smaller games together more interesting and fun. Are people competing against each other, or are they working together? Well, we saw that people were most commonly grouping themselves in a free-for-all way, so no one in the same faction. They could still work together in other ways, but not in a way we could clearly see via the factions. This was a good indicator, though, that there could be maybe some opportunities, especially with how popular Team was, to improve the ability to actually set up games with your friends and play as a team. Finally, non-competitive and cooperative were actually the most common play styles. Again, non-competitive could also be cooperative. It's just that what the data we looked at couldn't necessarily say that for sure. But in general, these results seem to show that people who play Hoi 4 like playing together. So, people like playing free-for-all competitive and team cooperative most often. Now what? Well, General MacArthur / Dan Lin, when creating and reviewing results, context is everything. You need to know the context of your data to ensure that what you report is accurate and useful. For example, here, I know that the mixed groupings can actually only occur with 3 players. So it's not very good to look at how popular mixed grouping is when so many people are playing in groups of 2. Here, I have removed the games with only 2 players. You can see that mixed has gone from 7% popularity to 30% popularity for games that are 3 players and more. And competitive also goes from 6% to 16% in popularity. So those really change when you look at the larger groups of multiplayer. It is also important to remember that no data is perfect. All data is susceptible to the biases of the people who create it, the limitations in the method of collection, and the imperfections of the technology used to process it. The only defense is to know your data and make sure that you are keenly aware of whatever could be affecting it. For example, those with the latest version, only those with the latest version could actually send this data to us. So those were the only ones we could look at. This could create an unknown bias, so it had to be mentioned in the report. It's also really important to get feedback and ask a lot of questions. We always peer review each other's stuff and try to make it as scientific as of a process as possible. And when we need more info, when something looks weird, we go and we talk to the devs in the community to make sure that what we're looking at is really the truth. So, how we turn insights into data is starting with a question, knowing the purpose, getting creative, making sure that we know the context, making sure that we've covered any possible biases, and getting lots of feedback and asking lots of questions after the fact. So now you know how we turn data into insights, but what do we actually use those insights for? Well, first of all, we use it to help find opportunities. This is most common when we're doing things like developing DLC or looking for potential new game opportunities. One opportunity we had was that CK2, after 6 fabulous years, has a lot of features. And we thought it'd be really great to learn from that and learn which features people really, really like. We decided to look at the rule preferences as an indicator of what people are enjoying in the game. Anyone who's played CK2 knows that it fires a rule preference choice at you, and you get to actually give a lot of information about how you want to play the game and what you like. Anyone who's seen that, though, does know that we have a challenge with that. Every single one of those rule preferences has different settings and scales. It's not like a 1 to 5. You get to pick all sorts of things. So we had to make it so that the data was actually comparable in some way. Otherwise, we couldn't do any analysis on it. So here you can see one's dynamic, and that's historical, and that's 13th century. So we decided to look at people switching away to non-default options as an indicator. What this meant was that the popularity of non-default settings were considered popular if many people actively chose them, and default settings were considered popular if very few people changed away from them. So, what did people say they loved? No. But this is a really good example why we need good data, so you don't get, someone says, wouldn't it be great if we had more Aztec invasions? What people actually loved was historically accurate features, maybe no surprise there. Non-epidemic diseases, so people really liked being told that they had rabies. Dueling was super popular, again, maybe no surprise there. New playable cultures and religions, tributaries, and Byzantine and Roman empires. So one example of taking this and turning it into something useful was Holy Fury should come with some cool dueling updates, based on the fact that you guys like it so much. We also look to find ways for room for improvement. For example, we look at out-of-sync rates and things that relate to them to try to combat bugs in the multiplayer. We also further investigate issues that have been brought up by players in the community. One such example was that we heard quite often from the community that Hoi 4 players found the game to be too easy. So we decided to look into the difficulty levels that people were choosing in order to see how strong these preferences actually were. However, when we tested the data, we found this. Easy was extremely popular, and Veteran was not quite as popular. Even as people played more hours, we did not see them shifting towards Veteran as much as we would have expected. Only 1% of players have moved over to Veteran after 200 or more hours of playtime. So only 1% more than that. So because of these quite surprising results, the Hoi 4 team added 2 new difficulty settings. One with increased difficulty called Elite, and one with lower difficulty called Civilian, both of which are now available in the game. After the change, we of course reran the analysis, and we got these results. to the added ones, these results. Interestingly, via communications with the community about this, and we had to ask them a lot of follow-up questions, the team suspects that it's actually a particular part of the veteran setting, the limitations on the political power that some people prefer not to play with. So maybe some experiments with that in the future. Although half of those who did want the additional challenge did move over to Elite. So that was interesting as well. But the real question remains, why are so many people in Hoi 4 playing on very easy mode? It was a lot more than any of us were expecting. Again, we had to go back to the community and ask, and it turned out that people wanted to run a country in World War II to relax. Most of our very easy players said they played Hoi 4 to relax, so they didn't want it to be, too challenging. We also use data to measure success, so that we can learn what works for you guys and what doesn't. Here we wanted to know if Rule Britannia made England really fun to play, which is obviously one of the intentions of area-focused immersion packs, to make that area super cool. And the answer was, the immersion pack worked. Not only did England see a great peak right after release, but both England and Great Britain have maintained a trend of double their previous share of games ever since. So quite cool, that one. So at Paradox, the main focus of our analysis is finding opportunities for new cool stuff, finding room for improvement, and measuring what works and what doesn't work in our games. So now you guys know how we roll at Paradox. Let's see how you guys stacked up against the data. I'm just getting the responses now. Ooh. All right. Oh, interesting stuff. Okay, how did you guys do? Since launch, Surviving Mars players have sent a total of, you guys said 152 million poor civilians to their death, and that was correct. Poor little brave Martians. All right. 67% of Hoi users actually play with mods every day, so it's a lot of different mods to choose from. However, the favorite total conversion mod is, you guys said Kaiserreich. It's actually the Road to 56, which is run in about 10 to 12% of game sessions every day. But I can tell you guys that Kaiserreich is in second place, with about 10% of sessions every day. While the most popular species to play in Stellaris is actually humans, which surprised me, the most popular ethical alignment was, ooh, this one, you guys were split on this one, but you said xenophobe. But it was actually Gestalt consciousness. That one surprised me. I also thought it was going to be xenophobe. All right, and what cultural event causes more people to play CK2? You guys got this one by a mile. Game of Thrones, when they have a season running, more people are playing CK2. All right, if any of this sounded cool to you at all, Data Science is hiring, so please check us out in the HR booth. I'll be in the board game room for the rest of the day if you have any questions for me that I guess don't get answered now. And yeah, otherwise, thanks for listening. Yeah, that's fine.
We are actually going to take some questions, so we get to have the fun throwing cube, but I guess we can use this one while we wait.
So what tools are you using?
We use mainly R for most of our analysis. R is super powerful. You look like you have a follow-up.
Not Python?
We actually, we decided to choose either R or Python. People that came before me decided to choose either R or Python, basically to make hiring easier, and so that we had kind of one thing to go with. And they went with R. Both are great. And now we're also introducing Tableau as our visualization tool. So some combination of them. Good question, though.
Yes, okay, I don't have to throw this to you.
I was just curious about some microeconomic data and how you handle that sort of thing. So I was curious specifically how you go about calculating price elasticities for different games and DLCs, and whether you then calculate elasticities for specific demographics, both and otherwise.
Right.
And another thing I was curious about in that. Actually, I forgot what the other question was. So.
So I'm actually, we actually have people called our partner account managers who do our pricing. One is back there. Everyone stare at him. So I can answer this question a little bit. I know that they do a lot of analysis, mainly based on our own data, of what people are kind of comfortable paying for our content. And we do look at, Victor, correct me if I'm wrong, we do look at countries for that. But we don't look too much at other demographics, basically. The Steam store price is based on country.
The other question was, have you found significant substitution or complementarity between games and DLCs for different games?
Could you elaborate on that one a little bit? Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So basically, would you say that they're closer to substitutes in that someone buys one instead of the other, or are they closer to complements, whereas someone buys one and then the other, like how you pair them with conversion packs and stuff like that?
I see. Yes. It really depends on like how long the game has been out a lot of the time. For games that have been out a really long time, and most people who want the base game have it already, then we don't see as much base game being bought in conjunction with DLC. However, we do make packs, like beginner packs and stuff, and I know that those are really popular. So I'd say, yeah, it really depends on the age of the game and that kind of thing. And maybe that guy over there is the one to ask the more detailed questions about this.
Okay. Do you use text mining techniques in order to assess sentiment analysis from forum content or social media content?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have definitely talked about it. At least in our area, us doing it, we've talked about it, especially for forum sentiment, to try to help people gauge, how people are feeling in the forum about different things. It's not something that we've actually actively done yet, but something that we're thinking about, because you can get a lot of responses. But I mean, we also have a user research team, and they do the deep dives when there's sentiment questions and how are people feeling, and they're the experts on feelings.
We have time for one more question. I think I saw one up there who's been waiting. So now I'm going to get to throw this next to the camera. What could possibly go wrong? There you go. Hold that. All right.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Hello, in the back.
Cool. So first off, great talk.
Thank you.
So I have a question: how you deploy these queries in the software? Basically, how do you, where do you layer these sort of questions? It's like feels pretty closely related to the game engine, I guess. But I mean, how do you deploy the queries?
Yeah, for sure. So it's our game devs who actually put the hooks in the code. So basically, if it's related to, I've sort of seen them do this. I'm going to try to answer. Basically, if it's related to like pushing a button, for example, they'll when the part of the code that says what that button does, they'll also say, so this button opens this menu, but it also sends a row of data to our backend. And then there is another backend piece that also adds things like date and all that fun stuff to its date and a unique code and whatever. So there's two layers. There's actual in-game code which sends stuff, and the devs do that, and then there's our DevOps team, and they do all the super standardized stuff that has to go with every data row, basically. Does that answer your question? Sorry, it's not more exciting.
All right, that is all the time that we have for questions. You can find Steacy in the board game room later and
yes,
ask
happy
her
to
more
answer
about
any
data.
more questions there.
Thank you so much, Steacy.
Thank you.